Hello chess friends! If you've been following the Fischer Random World Championship, then you probably recognize this position from a few days back, where Carlsen with the white pieces played a6, allowing his opponent, Hikaru Nakamura, to play queen e4 check with a simple fork, winning his rook. While these kinds of blunders are rare at the highest level, they do occasionally and inexplicably happen. But when they happen multiple times in the same tournament by the same player, it's only natural to begin to speculate about potential external factors that could be causing it. In Magnus Carlsen's most recent games from the semifinals of this Fischer Random tournament, he made not one, but two more elementary blunders. So we're going to take a look at these blunders now, along with a few other key decisive moments from these four games, and maybe it will offer us some insight as to what is going on with Carlsen, if anything, other than just random moments of chess blindness. So this first game didn't go too bad for Carlsen. He won this one with the black pieces, Nepo with white. And I'm just going to skip ahead to the first key moment where Carlsen finds a very nice tactic. After bishop to f2, he plays bishop takes b3 check. After a takes b3, he throws in this nice rook takes f4 move. This is important because it's opening up this f-file. He's going to castle and get his other rook involved into the attack, and that rook is immune from capture. If Nepo were to take that rook, then there's a checkmate in 5, beginning with queen takes b3 check, king moves, knight c2 check. You can't take the knight or else queen b1 is going to mate on the next move. So instead you have to move your king to d1. And now there's a nice mating pattern here that everyone should know. Knight to e3 check, discovered check, double check. So the king has to go to e1. If you've seen this pattern before, you will immediately know what black should play here, but if you haven't, take a minute, see if you can find black's best move. Queen d1 check will lead to mate on the next move. The queen must be captured, cannot be captured by the king because the knight is defending the queen. That's very important, so rook takes d1 must be played, but now knight c2 check is a smothered mate. That king has nowhere to go. That's a pattern that I've been able to use many times playing online, and you will too if you remember those moves. Okay, so that's why you can't take the rook on f4. So since the queen is under attack, she simply has to move. And now queen takes b3 check. King goes to e1. Knight c2 check. But this time the rook can take on c2, because if the queen were to try to go to b1, the rook can go to c1, since the knight is still on d3 and can defend the rook. So that's not played. Carlsen takes with the queen. But now there is a checkmate threat. The queen could go to b1. Knight goes here, queen takes knight, that's checkmate. So, Nepo plays e3, attacking the rook, giving his king an escape square. The rook moves back. Now his knight is under attack by the queen since his pawn moves, so he plays knight to e5. Carlsen castles. At this point, Nepo has two minor pieces for the rook, but Carlsen has three extra pawns. Two of them are connected pass pawns. His pieces are moving in for the attack, rook to f8. So Carlsen has a one game here. But he doesn't play it perfectly. We have some more moves, and he ends up giving back the exchange, which isn't bad. Rook takes f2, knight takes f2, but he needs to find the correct follow-up. Queen to f5 is correct, and after knight to h3, what he needed to play here was queen to g4. Now white has no good way to defend this bishop and this knight on h3. If you go bishop f1, there's just rook takes f1, followed by queen taking the knight on h3, and eventually black will be able to round up a pawn here, and these two connected passers are too powerful. Black should win. Maybe Carlsen was worried about bishop takes c6 in this position after queen to g4, but here black's okay because he can just go king to d8, and the king can escape over here to e8. It's not a big deal. But Carlsen, instead of playing that queen g4 move, which was the way to win, he plays king d8. And this is inaccurate because he goes for this same variation a couple moves later, but this time the white queen has got some activity. And he does do the same thing where he takes the bishop on f1 and gets the knight on h3, but now white has activity with the queen and rook. And so we have a rook versus knight, where Carlsen does have the extra pawns, but the queens end up coming off the board, and the computer says it's just a dead drawn position by the time we get here. And it remains fairly equal until Nepo gets a little too aggressive with his rook and allows Carlsen's king to get a little too close to the promotion square of this pawn. And after the following moves, Nepo has to resign because at this moment, Carlsen finds a nice tactical finish. What would you play here as black? You can queen your pawn because if the rook takes, there's the knight fork, winning the rook. And the black king is close enough to eat up this pawn and queen this remaining pawn. So Nepo resigned at that moment. So a good start for Carlsen. Let's go on to the next game. In game number 2, Carlsen had the white pieces, Nepo playing black. And I'm going to go to the first position of interest, where in this position, Magnus Carlsen sacrifices a piece for 2 pawns. It's a good sacrifice, the engine approves. But here, Carlsen does not find the correct follow-up. He plays queen to f3, looking to go to d5, I believe. But rook h1 would have been the winning move here. There's this crazy threat involving knight to e7 check. And if you take the knight, then queen takes 8 check is pretty devastating for black. And if you don't take the knight, you just move your king. There's this knight sacrifice on f5. Definitely a computer engine-y looking line where the queen takes on f5 and then you end up having to put a piece on f6 because of stuff like this. It's not surprising Carlsen missed that. He played queen to f3. And so we have some more moves. And the computer says it's about equal. Until this position here, we have this move, queen to e7. This moment here, queen to h6 check. Carlsen makes a game-ending blunder. He blocks the check with his rook, rook to d2. If you haven't seen this game yet, see if you can find black's best response here. Bishop takes e5 is a relatively simple tactic that Carlsen missed. The point is this pawn is pinned. If you take the bishop, queen takes d2 check, wins the rook. You've opened the file. The rook and the queen converge on d2. But after he allowed this tactic, bishop takes e5, now he's actually losing 2 pawns because this pawn is attacked by 1, 2, 3 pieces, and it's only really defended by 1 because this rook is pinned by the queen. So he's going to lose this pawn too, and you can't push that pawn forward because if you go d5, guess what? Bishop c3, you're going to win that pinned rook. Well, you'll win the exchange anyway if that rook's defended. Bishop for rook trade, we don't want that. So Carlsen just moves his king here and he loses another pawn, which is just too much. The material deficit is just too devastating and he loses this game. On to game number 3. We're going to start in this position where Carlsen with the white pieces has his queen under attack and he chooses the wrong square to move his queen to. He goes to f5. What he needed to play was queen to g7. This keeps the threat of knight to f5 to d6 with check alive. This is white's best plan. Plugging up this diagonal would not be very nice for black, but instead he goes queen to f5, and now black has knight to c4. Threatening a fork, okay. Carlsen was relying on this tactic though. Knight takes c6, opening the diagonal for his queen and rook to converge on d7. That's a checkmate threat. The black queen is under attack, but now Nepo unleashes knight to e2 check, which unfortunately opens a diagonal to h2 for the queen and rook to converge on that square. Carlsen takes the knight. We have queen to h2 check. King goes to f1. Threat of checkmate is still alive. Queen to h1 check. King to f2. Rook takes e2 check. King takes e2, queen takes g2 check, and now Carlsen's king is forced to the d file. King to d3, unfortunately blocking the checkmate threat. There's knight b2 check. With a fork, the king goes to d4, and now Nepo takes out the knight finally. This file is still blocked, and white is totally busted here. The rook is still being attacked by the knight. If you try to move that rook, let's say to b1, there's queen d2 check. The king is very short on squares. White doesn't have a good response. If you try to put the bishop in the way, there's just knight takes here, and then rook h4 check, for example. The white king is just too exposed. Too many threats. What Carlsen plays is queen to e5, but after rook h4 check and bishop e4, he resigns. Nepo on his next move could take out the rook, but the quickest mate, according to the engine, would start with queen to f2 check, king c3, and then take out the rook. And I think it was like a mate in 16 or something like that. So Carlsen outplayed again. Gotta hand it to Nepo. This one wasn't so easy. No elementary blunders in this game. Nepo just had a better handle on the tactics. For game number 4, we're going to start right at the critical moment where Carlsen, with the black pieces, makes his second elementary blunder of these 4 semifinal games when he decides that it's okay to take the pawn on a4 with knight takes a4. See if you can figure out why this is a mistake. What should white play here? The winning move is knight to b7. There's an attack on the rook. If you move the rook, there's knight takes d6, rook takes d6, rook to b7 check, wins a piece. And if instead you take the knight, you have the same problem. Rook takes b7 check, black is losing the bishop. So at the moment when Nepo played knight to b7, Carlsen had to resign, giving him a 3rd loss against Nepo out of these 4 games. It seems that he is not playing up to his usual standard. Is his mental state being affected by the impending lawsuit filed against him by Hans Niemann? Or is it that this Fischer random variant of chess just isn't his cup of tea and it's throwing him off? Or is he just tilted because of the blunder he made against Hikaru Nakamura? I don't know. Tell me in the comments what you think. But thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel for more chess analysis of the most important games coming soon.